horses learn is a well-studied science. The science of behavior and learning is no different than any other science, such as biology or chemistry. And we can use our understanding of how horses learn to change their behavior in ways that are low stress and humane. Horse behavior consultants focus on changing the response that horses have to triggers that can result in fear or aggression or other behavior problems. The difference between horse behavior consultants and horse trainers is horse trainers focus primarily on teaching new and wanted behaviors to the horse. Horse behavior consultants, on the other hand, tend to focus their work more on helping people with unwanted behaviors that the horse may do. Horse behavior consultants change or stop unwanted behaviors using a low-stress LIMA approach, and LIMA stands for least invasive, minimally aversive. What that means is we use techniques that are effective but also humane and horse-friendly. Horses can have behavior problems for a number of reasons. They can be related to pain, they can also be related to fear or confusion about training. For example, a horse might have a saddle that doesn't fit them properly, and as soon as they start to see the saddle be brought out, they might try to bite the person or bite the lead rope when they're tied up. It's really important, again, that we address that pain. What can happen, though, even once the pain has been addressed and there's no longer any pain, the trigger of the saddle might cause the horse to perform those behaviors. The horse might still pin his ears when you approach with the saddle. In those instances, we can help the horse change the emotional response to the triggers. We often think of them fleeing or fighting to escape the source of their fear, but they'll also do two other things. They will frequently freeze or they will fidget. So a horse who is standing very still and calm, he may appear to be calm, but he may actually be frozen in fear. It's really important with those horses that we're looking for the really subtle signs of fear, things like decreased blinking, wrinkles over the eye, a tight chin, tight facial muscles. Horses who freeze in fear frequently surprise people, and they'll describe them as the horse who explodes out of nowhere or who's crazy. One of the first things I do when meeting with a client is I take a really detailed history to find out what the triggers are that make the behavior happen. And also if there's anything I can find that keeps the behavior reoccurring. So all animals learn as a result of the consequences for performing the behavior. If a horse does something that results in a consequence that he finds desirable, he'll do that behavior again. One of the first things we do is we try to manage and limit the exposure the animal might have to the triggers that cause them to perform the behavior. And this isn't a long-term plan where we just tell the person, you can't do X with the horse for the rest of his life. We set the horse up for success and try to limit the number of times they can perform the unwanted behavior before we implement the behavior plan. Eventually, part of our behavior modification plan would be bringing those triggers back in and teaching the animal to be comfortable with them in a slow, systematic way so that they can eventually be back in the horse's life again. Desensitization simply means exposing the horse to the trigger that causes the fear in very small amounts, not enough to trigger the fear so that we keep the horse in that ideal learning frame of mind. We're going to be working on desensitization to having her hind legs touched, so I'm just going to come in and touch Crystal and see how she feels about me approaching her and touching her. Her head went up a little bit there, but she didn't move off, so I'm just going to come out. If we expose the horse to the trigger too quickly or too much, it can actually trigger the fear, and it's really then hard to change the horse's emotional response. So the goal here is to not trigger the response of leaving and have her be worried, and gradually get a little bit farther down her body. So when I'm working with a horse like this, if she has an issue, for example, with her hind legs being touched, I'm not just going to work just on that hind leg. I'll work on the hind leg, and then I might come in and say, okay, can I rub you here on your ribs? That's a little bit different. You know, really good training happens, you know, again, small, short, frequent sessions. You know, if you can do this twice a day for a couple of minutes a day, that's preferred to coming in and trying to hammer out an hour with the horse and potentially having things go wrong and having the horse react in a way that you don't want them to react. Counter conditioning simply means to change the emotional response from a negative emotional response to a more positive one. So for example, with our needle phobic horse, we would change the emotional response of fear of being approached with a needle to one of pleasure, that the horse might be getting a treat or something else instead. One of the things we focus on when changing a horse's behavior is really thinking about what it is we want the horse to do instead of the problem behavior. So we'll think about how we can teach the horse how we want him to behave or perform, rather than just focusing on what we don't want him to do. Using punishment to address behavior problems can result in what's known as behavior suppression, where seemingly the behavior has stopped occurring, but the problem with just suppressing behavior is it's not changing the root cause of what's causing the behavior to happen in the first place. And that cause, again, could be pain or fear or confusion. Another tip to minimize behavior problems when you're training is to really think about keeping your horse in a learning frame of mind. And that frame of mind is one where your horse is paying attention, but he's not feeling nervous or anxious or frightened. When training horses or doing behavior modification work, I like my clients to think about having different zones that we can keep the horse in. And the green zone is the ideal place to train the horse. He has his attention on us, but he's not anxious or worried about what's happening. Then we go into the yellow zone, where the horse might start to feel a little bit anxious about what's happening. His head might become elevated, his blinking might decrease, he might get some little worried wrinkles above his eyes or have a tight chin. And that would be a good indicator that maybe what we're doing might be a little bit too much, too fast, too much exposure. We might just want to step back in our training and trying to think of going back into that green zone. What we really want to avoid doing when we're training horses or doing behavior modification work is triggering them to be in the red zone, where they might exhibit flight or fight behaviors. So they might try to bolt or buck or rear or strike or kick. That's really not a great place to be thinking about training a horse or trying to change their behavior. Think about shaping new behaviors, and what that means is to think about what your end goal is, and then think about what the closest thing your horse can already do, and then think about the steps that it might take to get the horse to get to that end goal between those 2 points. Shaping really helps us to be able to progressively teach the horse what it is we want him to learn, and we can use reinforcement along the way to say yes to the horse. That's exactly what I want you to do. Really important when training to remember lots of short, positive sessions. Horses are very smart and they're very quick learners. They don't need hours and hours of training every single day. Some important tips to help you minimize behavior problems in your horses. One of the most important things is really understanding who the horse is as a species. So really important that we get to know and learn what's important to him and what the horse needs in his life. I like to call it the 3 F's. Those are the horse's primary needs of friends, forage, and freedom. So making sure that we maximize his contact with other horses, also maximizing how often he is able to forage during the day, so how much access he has to hay, ideally 14 to 20 hours a day, and maximizing the amount of freedom he has to move about as he chooses and pleases to be able to perform normal behaviors.